Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man whose mission is simple: to kill the jackal, the bastard that armed both sides.
Tim Longo. Yes, the jackal.
There'll be some people, I think, who will know this game just from that introduction.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure. We are, of course, turning to a new series, as we do. We finished off our SimCity last week. We did not get to line up an interview in time. We're still working on it. Let's hope. So we're turning to Far Cry 2, which is later than Tim realized. But I was happy to replay. I've played this game, not just a completion, but this was 100%er, I think, for me. But
okay.
Xbox 360. Yeah, I found all the diamonds and whatever. So I did all the checkboxy things in this game back in the day. It being a checkboxy game, you might realize that it is developed by UbiSoft, making it our second UbiSoft game. I believe, right? We just did Prince of Persia as our only other.
Yeah, I was trying to remember if this is going to be basically our entrance point into the Ubisoft open world formula, and I think it is. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. I mean, that was kind of our.
It's probably a good one to do that on. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, and it's one definitely to play. I mean, I think the AC2 games are quite good as well, and they're the same thing as far as that goes. In terms of layout, this one actually feels a little looser, I think, than Assassin's Creed already did at the time, but it does have all those things, and it does have multiple mission types. It is very much in the AC, Ubisoft. Like, which one of these do you like? Do you like the mercenary one, or do you like the total, the Ghost Recon one, or do you like the historical figures one? Like, that's like your breakdown. Or do you want the hacker one? Like, so it's like your choices.
Exactly.
Your four flavors of Ubisoft, Ubisoft game. It's how do you like your theming? And I like this theming quite a lot. I've played 2, 3, 2. I guess I've only played 2 and 4. I don't think I've played 3. I have it, but I don't think I've played it. I think I've only played 2 and 4. And then Primal, which was the 4 add-on. Standalone historical. I think you're a caveman in that one or something.
Yeah. That's my understanding. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've enjoyed them, but I have not played 3, 5, or certainly 6.
Well, in this one,
go ahead. No, go.
I was just going to say that of the game formula that they have, this one is the only first-person shooter. Ghost Recon. What's the funny thing about Ghost Recon, which I have played a lot of Wildlands and Breakpoint. Very memorable name. But Ghost Recon wasn't always like that, and so they basically, Ghost Recon adopted, their only franchise that has not adopted this formula is Rainbow Six at this point. But
well, that's not true. Rayman, Beyond Good and Evil, right? Those are all.
Oh, right. As far as
anything Michel Ancel touches is not, kind of
right.
Although I could see Beyond Good and Evil 2 being that way, based on
sure seems like.
It open worldy, even space opera, whatever that it turns out to be. Who knows if we'll ever get that game. But
but this one was always the one that I gravitated to because of the first person part of it. So, but I didn't play this one back in the day, and I haven't.
I did. I played it in 2009. I played it in a blaze of glory over a long Thanksgiving weekend, as I recall. So it was like, I don't know, 5 days. I started Wednesday night and finished Sunday, and just did nothing, pretty much nothing else for a few days. Like trying to figure out how to get to all the diamonds and all that stuff. I may have even finished it in just for like 3 days or something like that. But I was doing other stuff. I watched some movies. I remember what movies I watched that Thanksgiving. That's me.
That's that's you.
Yep, that's me. But yeah, so it's first person lineage. We were talking about this kind of beforehand. Comes by way of the original Far Cry, which was a Crytek developed Crytek engine game, CryEngine game, I guess you'd say, which is this engine with, which at the time was really pushing foliage. It was also set. I actually played that one. I don't know if you played the original Far Cry.
I did a little bit. Yeah.
Days. Yeah. It kind of was like, it started off more like Far Cry 2 in the sense of like you're fighting other humans. And then at a certain point, it's like, oh, but there are also mutations. Like, I'm not really sure.
Dinosaurs,
I don't remember now what they were. No, they weren't. They were like, I think they were mutated humans because they were sort of like a bullet, in like in D&D, like they were, or boulette or whatever those things are called. But on two legs, right, instead of multiple. So it was like they kind of would charge you, and they had a lot of armor and just natural armor and things like that. It was a very, and I'm not sure I even finished that one. I do remember at a certain point going, okay, well that was a choice, and then just kind of like, I think it kind of lost me at that point, because it was less of the world exploration through the plants and more like more underground bunkery type stuff, as you kind of uncovered the secret. So this is a radical departure from that. But we should talk about the history a little bit between the engines and all of that stuff that you were alluding to in pre-show.
Well, yeah, I mean, this was, we've talked about this before, and this is 2008, so it's obviously a little later, but you have the major players in the engine wars, if you will, being id and Epic primarily, and Crytek was always sort of like this one trying to edge in there, and CryEngine, as Brett said, was their engine, it still is their engine, and Far Cry was, because everyone had a shooter to showcase their engine with, was that, and Ubisoft was the publisher. And then there was a split at some point, and Ubisoft retained the rights to Far Cry, and Crytek went off to make Crysis, which was their IP that they still own, and a new game is being made actually as we speak, and was announced, and to showcase there, and it also went into an open world direction. And Far Cry, between Far Cry to Far Cry 2, Far Cry 2 became the open world one, which we will talk a lot about, in the coming weeks. But there was this sort of fork in the road, but the engine, Dunia, right, is the name of the engine?
Dunia, yeah.
Is a derivative. It branched off of essentially the CryEngine, and now this many years later, which Brett looked it up, even up to Far Cry 6, they're still using that engine, is obviously, Ubisoft's at this point, right? They've probably rebuilt it and reworked it quite a bit. And of course, CryEngine's used for Hunt Showdown as well as Crysis games, etc. And Crytek
and
for
Lumberyard.
And right, exactly. Lumberyard is another weird like offshoot branch. And Crytek was also doing a fair amount of side business for licensing the engine out. They tried to compete with the Epics and the ids of the world, and and we know where that ended up. Basically, at this point, almost
honestly, id was kind of getting out of that game at this point. Epic. I don't know that they had specifically ceded the field to Epic, but Epic, I think, Epic had really, really invested in it. Around 2003, 2004, they brought in the team that had been making Unreal Championship, which was, I think, originally like a licensing deal, or like they hired a studio to do it, and then that studio turned out to have a lot of technical chops of their own. They brought them in, and that kind of merged into the main, Unreal Engine business, and they actually really revamped and really focused on that at that time. And it, I think, was already starting to step away. I mean, Quake 4,
Yeah.
I think, was around that time, 2004, 2005, and kind of might have been one of the last. Like, I'm sure that, I mean, there have been games that have had, like, the Source engine was based off of some Quake thing a long time ago. You know, it is definitely its own thing, and maybe entirely its own thing by now, certainly. But so there are probably other things that were kind of kicking around, and, you know, games that were kind of limping along with their modified Quake engines and things like that, and et cetera.
Such a weird,
but
yeah.
yeah, but it, I think, was basically saying, you know what, we don't really want to be in the licensing business anymore. We're not. It's, you know, it wasn't really their core business ever. It was kind of, and the cost of supporting that becomes higher, obviously, the more licensees you have, right? You're spending precious time while you're also probably trying to ship a game, you know, trying to support the engine, you know, that people have paid you a lot of money for it, you know, in the sense of, there might be, you know, it might be buggy, or, you know, and, you know, you sort of have to like promote out patches, or, you know, give people access to some place where code that you think is good is, you know, some kind of source repository somewhere, you know, in the days before Git, for example. So it's not really easy to do. And it's like, it's a big headache, and you really have to invest in that business. And Epic really did. Epic, I think, saw this was a potential big future for them. And by, you know, almost doubling their tech team, I think at the time, by merging in this other group, I think we're like, you know what, that's what we're going to do. And we're going to actually fund a whole part of our business to do this. And it kind of went, I don't know if we want to do that. So Crytek really did, I think, have a shot at it at the time. And obviously they're still around, and they have had licensees over the years. Epic kind of won in that grand battle. But Crytek was extremely pretty at the time. I do remember being like, wow, that's pretty compelling. Like, they're really doing a lot here with the original Far Cry. So yeah, that's definitely the history.
Yeah, and looking up the dates and stuff, as we were talking about in pre-show, Crisis came out in 2007 and was again that showcase. And Notorious, I don't know if it was that it was under-optimized or what it was, but Notorious, you know, notoriously hard on the PC specs. Like, you really needed a beefy thing to run it.
Yes, you did.
Yep. But then Dunia, which is again an offshoot of that same engine, for Far Cry 2 comes out the next year. And so there are a lot. I did play all of Crisis back when it came out, and can see that there are, you know, many similarities between the two from a, you know, highest level perspective. But it just was an interesting time for the open world first person shooter, like Genesis, genre of kind of coming out at this point.
Yeah.
I was going to say about, I'm losing it.
Well, I wanted to turn to the sort of what you end up adding into this technical mix on this game, which is Clint Hocking, and Patrick Redding, for that matter, who's gone on to be a CD entirely on his own right, with a couple of later Splinter Cell games, and now I think he's the creative director on Gotham Knights. So he's still around, although he's moved over to Warner Brothers. Clint Hocking, of course, after this game, went off into the wilderness. He had done a number of Splinter Cell games, had started that franchise, basically, and did this Far Cry, 2, which was a total departure from what the series had been before. Granted, only one game. It really took it in a different direction, and we'll talk about what that direction is as we get into the game proper. But that's kind of been his Ubisoft MO to some degree, because he came back to take the Watch Dogs franchise in a different direction, rather, being less sort of focused on one character and their story in the sort of Ubisoft mold, and instead become this collection of characters game that Watch Dogs Legion was, where you could basically enlist any kind of all sorts of characters. In theory, anybody in the quote unquote world, right? You can enlist to your aid in Watch Dogs Legion. So that's kind of been his thing. Now that he's returned to the fold, he's doing that again. Kind of curious to see what he does next as far as that goes.
Yeah. But, did you play that new Watch?
I have not.
Watch
I'm not.
Legions? Yeah.
Well, I got to play the other two, Tim. How will I even understand?
Yeah, that's definitely that's a problem.
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
I think Patrick Redding is my recollection is one of his major contributions to this is the sort of dynamic story part of it, because of the things with the buddy system and all of that. I feel like that's my recollection. I will spend a little more time trying to track that down for the future, because I don't want to sell him short. I do remember that was a big deal at the time, and something that they definitely talked about a lot in terms of all of that. So, probably some stuff with the AI as well, and the buddy AI, which is all pretty interesting. But let's turn to 2008 in video games. I don't think we've done this year before. I don't remember ever mentioning any of these games other than in passing on the cast, not in this sort of way. Another franchise that took prior games and took them in a different direction was one Fallout 3. I'm reading here. Is that correct?
Yeah, something. It rings a bell. Rings a bell.
Yeah, it had something to do with that one. And then another one too. This little known series called Tomb Raider had an installment this year with Underworld. I don't know. What would you have had a credit on that? You must have had some kind of credit on that.
No, maybe special thanks or something, but I don't recall. Eric Lindstrom was the director on that. Harley,
Harley
White Widow, was a lead designer on that. So yeah.
We interviewed Harley. We worked with Harley on Republic Commando, and we interviewed her. Was that last year? Year before?
There's no way that was last year, but maybe. I don't know.
No, 2 years. I think 2 years. Yeah,
because last year was a linked Ocarina of Time. I feel like the epic, similar slot. Epic,
yeah. A whole host of games. A lot of 4s here. I'm
Left 4 Dead, which is not a 4.
Dead, not a 4 really, but 4 is right there in the title because it's a 4-player co-op versus the zombie apocalypse game. GTA 4, Metal Gear Solid 4, Devil May Cry 4, Persona 4. Also some notable 2s. I saw Condemned 2. I don't know. Have you ever played one of the Condemned games?
No.
You only play horror basically for the cast. That game had some of the best scary audio. That definitely is up there with the Alien Isolation as far as I'm concerned with audio. That one, cut right through me. Rock Band 2, Fable 2, a few 2s. And
you mentioned Gears of War 2 already?
I have not, but that was in the list. Yes. In fact, I didn't write that one down, so I missed that too. And then a sprinkling of sort of original titles, some of which stuck around for a while. Little Big Planet, Dead Space, Mirror's Edge, a few titles. Dead Space had a trilogy. Little Big Planet had a few.
Mirror's Dead Space being rebooted.
Second.
Yeah.
Yep. And a couple others here. It was also the time when the indie games started to hit on Xbox 360 in particular, with their, I guess, Summer of Arcade and sort of Xbox Live indie, stuff started. In particular, Braid and World of Goo are big ones there. World of Goo was on a number of platforms, including, I think I played World of Goo on the Wii, I believe, which was also around this time with Mario Kart Wii and Super Smash Bros. Brawl. And then to connect back to our last series, Spore came out this year.
Oh, really? I missed that.
Yeah,
probably
Spore
because I'm looking at a
2008
meta. I'm looking at a meta list here, and it's not
right.
It's not up at the top. Mass Effect.
It's a notable game, though.
That must have been a. Oh,
don't know if that's
that was Windows. It says Mass Effect, but
okay,
it was for the Windows version, I guess. Yeah,
coming out later. Yeah, so a lot of. I mean, certainly a lot of sequels there. Some interesting. I don't think I mentioned Army of Two. I was like, that's not a 2 game, even though it's also got a 2 in the title. Army of Two is a sort of grindhouse kind of game, which was another thing that was starting to happen around that time, or had been happening around that time. Games that tried to go for a sort of grungy, grindhouse aesthetic.
Which one?
I'm thinking also Army of Two.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, it
And
was
like Kane and Lynch would have been maybe that year. Or
very
not this year, but maybe
broy.
year. Yeah. But also kind of pushing the
it's extreme
moral
intense.
grayness in a sharper direction. Wet would have been maybe this year, well, not this year, but maybe the next year or the year after, which was a Bethesda published one or ZeniMax published one. So I'm just kind of like thinking of other things that were kind of in that vein. So I'm just like trying to find the other sort of directions things were going they're kind of unique. I do like those kind of grindhouse games just because they often try to push the aesthetics in interesting ways. And I like that. I thought that was cool. Good thing for games to try to do more often. So that kind of sets it in its time. So you know what kind of games are coming out in 2008.
But yes. one to mention that's a little bit on the side, but it's because it's Ubisoft, is that we talked about it in our Prince of Persia series, probably, almost definitely, is the that Prince of Persia reboot that was just called Prince of Persia. That had the companion AI and the stylized art direction and looked
great game.
Quite really interesting. Yeah. So it's sort of like where Ubisoft is still in their journey, if you will, to finding what their real focus areas are at the time, and so they were still dabbling in that Prince of Persia model, right? Linear, story-based, etc. So
yeah, it was. I think was it linear? I don't think it was entirely linear.
Might have been hub and spoke, but it wasn't open world.
I think it was hub and it was not open world, but I think it was hub and spoke. I think there were essentially four channels you could go down for 4 elements, probably something like that. Yeah, it was I played that one. I liked it. That was the one that you couldn't die because the companion would help you, as you pointed out, the companion AI. She wasn't really an AI to do that stuff. She'd just kind of show up in the place where you had died and put you back, which honestly, I don't mind. I remember people not liking that at the time because it's like, oh, you took away all the challenge. It's like, no, you still have to do all the stuff. You just don't have to reload and do all this stuff a million times. So I don't know. I always had a little soft spot in my heart for that one. Both because of that, but also because of the art style and the story I thought was quite good. So yeah, good games. Anyway, let's move on to discussing Far Cry 2 in detail. Now that we've kind of talked about the engine and
we've set the stage.
We've set the stage, I think. This game starts with a Half-Life style opening sequence, which I thought was pretty good. Can you tell me a little bit about it from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think the other element of this series that I always, again, never jumped into, but always was drawn to, is that they, even up to today, I believe they're very committed to the first person perspective. 100%, is my understanding, and this one starts and reestablishes that. And as you said, Half-Life-y kind of ending, or maybe you said that in pre-show, but you're in this Jeep. Well, first of all, when you first start the game, you're selecting your character, which I did not remember. I only played a tiny bit of this back in the day and didn't finish it, which we think doesn't really have any impact other than what buddies are in the world later. And there is some dynamic narrative to the game, but again, I don't think the character you chose really has much impact. But you choose your character. That character has a model, and so when you're in first person, you look down in the seat, you see your character's model there. I assume the models are all different. Mine has tattoos and stuff, so clearly is who I chose. And there's this cab driver. You're in a Jeep, kind of, so you can see outside, and you're driving through Africa. I don't recall where in Africa, what country, or etc. But
it's not a specific. It's just a country, and just the country of unrest. It's not specified.
There you go.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Which has kind of been their, that's been their thing ever since, right? Is that they set them in recognizable places, but don't specify what that place is. So 6, for example, is, I guess, basically Cuba.
Yeah, right.
I think, right? And 5 is actually one where I think it's definitively meant to be America.
It's
somewhere in the Midwest.
yeah.
Although it doesn't say like it's in this state. I don't think.
I don't remember. Right? I thought it did say it, like, because it's in Montana. It's basically Montana is where they have modeled it after, but maybe not. And then, but isn't 4 also just clearly in the Himalayas or something?
Yes, but they don't say Nepal
what. They don't say which
Tibet
country.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they try to skirt that, and then some of their other franchises like Ghost Recon kind of fumble that differently. Like Wildlands was specifically in oh no, I'm blanking on, it might have been Costa Rica, but anyway, and then once you do that, you're making commentary whether you like it or not, and again, we've talked about this even as recent as the last series, where I just don't believe video games can be apolitical, and Ubisoft continues to hold the line on this thing. And the reason it applies to the opening of this is that in this game, and I don't remember what Clint and others said about this, but I feel like they very clearly
Clint
into
bucks the trend on that. I mean, he's the one who's like, of course it's political.
Yeah,
like
that's what I mean.
He said it in Africa,
Yeah.
He's unabashed about that. For the sake of correctness, Far Cry 5 is indeed set in Montana, but in a fictional county. So it's not a real place in Montana.
Okay, well, that's just like not understanding how the U.S. Works. Correct. Because it's still Anyway, but okay, maybe they deflect a little bit, but yeah, I do think you very quickly in the beginning of this game get that they're unabashedly embracing conflict in Africa, diamonds, factions, outsiders impact. Like this cabbie is basically running you through kind of a bit of the state of things, right? That a lot of the locals are trying to leave because of the conflict, right? And he kind of establishes that it's basically like in my opinion, setting the stage for, anything can happen. There's so much upheaval and there's so much conflict happening that when you're about to just run around wherever you want to and shoot whomever you want to, it's okay. You know what I mean? Because not that it's okay for political reasons, but that things are so chaotic, and that you may have to take sides and you may have to, try to figure out who's good and who's bad and realize that everything's gray and, those sorts of things. Right. They're even, one of the details I liked about that opening Jeep ride is that they even start feathering in some of the diegetic nature of the game, because down on the seat next to you to your left is the map that you will eventually see, right. And or a map like that one, and it shows the path that you were driving from the airport to the town that you're going to, or no. Yeah, the town. I forget the exact location.
You're going to Pala.
Yeah, you're going to Pala. Yeah. So, you are. Okay, I forgot that then. So that's a cool connection point. I
think so. I think
to later on, because Pala's the first town you go to with the church and stuff. But so anyway, it's like it was good. And obviously, like Half-Life, they have scenes happening outside, and you have full control of your camera, so you can look around, and there's planes driving by and boats and flying by in boats, and conflict. There's a moment that I assume I'm supposed to make note of, where you come upon a group of people who are like a checkpoint of some kind, and there is a white guy there in a red shirt with a 41 on it that looks, he's got blonde hair, and he's speaking, I feel like his accent might have been British, might have been American, but the cab driver's talking about, these mercenary groups coming in and different countries coming in. And so I assume that might be somebody important. And they also,
I think, funny, I don't recall. I mean, it certainly doesn't, like when you play a game like this in 3 days, certain things like that are probably
right. Stick. I think he shows up later in the opening sequence where he's driving in the back of he's got a an M60, a mounted M60 in the back of a thing. Anyway, I don't know. Maybe it's nothing, but it at least is establishing the setting of things. I think you also have a malaria moment in the beginning of this.
You do, yeah. You have a bit where you get a little fuzzy while you're driving around, you know, and so yeah, even in that drive, they're setting up and showing a lot of the systems that are going to be in play, vehicles, the malaria problem, the fire propagation system, which is a whole thing, is shown. We probably won't talk about those in detail yet because they haven't really impacted too heavily on our play. I know you got a little further than I did. This game on the PC, I played it on the Xbox 360 at the time and had no motion sickness issues. Played it on the PC this time and definitely had some. So we shall see. I'm gonna up the FOV and things like that. There are things that I can do. I think that'll help.
One quick thing
crosshair.
I was just going to say turn on, because the first thing when you told me that first thing I did was turn the crosshair on, and I didn't get motion sickness. I don't know if that helped, but it usually helps me to make sure that there's a crosshair on because they're going so.
FOV has always been my biggest thing, actually.
So definitely cool with that, but
because the source engine games are typically fairly low FOV, like Stanley Parable, a game, that is not about, quick fast movement and stuff like that, was one that made me very sick within half an hour. And it turned out it was just the FOV, and I just turned it up to like 100, 105 or something. I was like, oh, okay, now I'm fine. Not great, but fine, playable. So we'll see. I might be starting over on the PS3 or something. I'll just download it.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So it sets up all these things. It's definitely leaning into the fact that you're in a political setting. It's very strongly themed in that way. And these games, while they don't typically identify real places, they nonetheless set themselves in real places, with Montana, I guess, being the exception in that way. But they're definitely like, this is they're definitely envisioning a place, an amalgam probably of places. But it's definitely, it's definitely using this theme. And I've never liked that they back away from saying that's by saying that's not political, because it's like, that's even grosser to me. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Just own it. Like it's I am perfectly happy to watch films about complicated, difficult subjects involving, politics or even real world politics. I don't expect those people to say, but this is not, this is not political. I expect it to be political, and that's always been fine by me. But Ubisoft has their own approach in the marketing.
And I'm also wondering, because I think the interesting thing about us playing this game for Ubisoft is there's a bunch of so there's a little bit of not a little bit, but there's a cult following behind this game. It's not perfect, is my understanding. And I know some of that from over the years, talking to people like you and others who've played it ad nauseum, read articles about it, even talked to people who worked on it. So it's got a bit of a cult following. And I think one of the things about it that I always remember hearing people talk about it is that it is, and we'll get into this over the series, but there are so many bold, interesting, and sometimes even considered weird decisions made. And there is a bit of because in the podcast, we try to talk about legacy so much and where things, what were the forks in the road for certain decisions and strategies that especially publishers were making. Like, I don't remember. Maybe you remember better. I'd have to do more research on it, but I'm betting that the political nature of this was like both popular, but also enough controversial enough for Ubisoft to where this could have been the game where they're like, oh, wait a second. Okay, we have to actually not talk about this very much because they, the core audience they're going for doesn't want to talk it's like probably, there was some shenanigans in marketing or business that are saying like, oh, no, we can't message it this way. Like nobody can, Clint being Clint isn't one to really care about that stuff. So he'll say what he wants to say probably, but probably after that, they're like, no, you can't,
Yeah. And also, I'm not sure to what degree Clint talking about that stuff reaches the sort of global
Definitely not. Yeah.
audience. That's the hardcore and other game designers are people who know what Clint's saying about a game. I actually think it actually dates to the year before, because Assassin's Creed in particular, which of course is set in the time of the Crusades, basically, and you're not King Richard, you're an assassin.
Yeah.
And that game actually starts with a disclaimer.
Oh yeah, you're right.
This game was made by a team of varying genders, race, it's etc. There's like
religious backgrounds.
Religious background, actually was in there as well, and they call that out. Their diversity in the team that made the game, which is not surprising considering I think that game was maybe 500 people. It's definitely going to be diverse, because they only got bigger from there, but I think back then they were still in the low to mid hundreds numbers of developers. So yeah, they had already kind of dipped their toe into that. There's definitely a cake and eat it too aspect. It's like they want to set it in these provocative places, but they also want to kind of step back and say, oh no, this is just whatever.
Yeah, it is a have their cake and eat it too approach. It's like we want,
yeah.
And to be fair, like Call of Duty does the same thing, right? Like
that's true.
They want to be. They know that current events and modern settings sell because people relate and can. Well, their core audience does, right? Like we should be clear that their core audience is not as global and diverse as it should be. And I think that's probably one of the problematic aspects of Far Cry 2 as well, right? Like how does this land in other regions? But anyway,
it's gun fantasy, right? Where it's like, oh, you can get all the guns, right? All these real guns, right? Which is also a political statement or issue, right? I mean, that they're licensing these guns, right? They pay gun companies to use their real guns. And I think these are all real guns in here. They certainly are in Call of Duty games. Like, so there is a certain, and that definitely appeals to an American sensibility, I would say, and our complicated relationship with guns here in this country. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not. I don't play a lot of shooters anymore. So it's interesting to return to this one.
And I tend to when I do play these days, I tend to play stuff that is more fantastical, and not modern and definitely not World War II and things like that. I just So anyway, that's me, that's you, whatever. But but probably somebody at Ubisoft would argue that part of the bread and butter and special formula of the Far Cry games is that sense of, oh, I generally know where the Himalayas are as a random gamer. Oh, I get to go there and do Far Cry stuff. Cool. Yeah. It's like that's how they're thinking about it versus like, do you know, gamer, what's going on in the Himalayas from a political perspective?
Right.
And has been for many, many, years. No, but so et cetera, et cetera. So they take these like, and Montana is a great example as well of like, yeah, we kind of know things are pretty messed up when it comes to gun rights and, militias and private, private military groups and things like that. But I don't really know, if I'm somebody in Europe or what have you. So Montana sounds like fanatics would be there. Let's set it there. It's like, so.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't, it's just it's never not going to be that way. And again, Call of Duty does the same thing. And I don't know, Assassins has always been, as I've said before, you've played nearly all of them, many, many hundreds of hours. I haven't played really any of them other than a little bit of the first one. And that one has always befuddled me a little bit because it's like, awesome. I understand that history is sort of like the core thing, and Assassins, I love Assassins. Like I love that stuff. Like I should like that. But for whatever reason, like going back to, what era is it? Is it Renaissance? It's not Renaissance in Italy, but
no, Middle Ages.
Middle Ages in Italy. Um, for instance, in
Oh
two
no, for two is
is
Renaissance.
Renaissance. Yeah, so I was going to use
Yeah.
two just because it's Italy is maybe a little bit more, Anyway, so but it's like I don't like the historical angle is something that is I'm still surprised to this day that it does so well because history isn't typically, but I guess people relate to it, right? They know where Italy is generally and things like that. They know where
Yeah, but also
Egypt
they
is.
they model. So there's a number of things that they put in those games, and we're definitely far afield at this point. But
Yeah, we're not
we're a
talking.
far cry from Far Cry 2.
Yeah,
But they also model a ton of historical landmarks, and so
yeah,
you're going around and you're
tourism.
like literally in 2013 I went to Rome and Florence, and I would be walking around and I'd look at a building and I'd go, oh my god, I've climbed that building. Like
Yeah,
they were literally that detailed. I mean, I'm not kidding. Like it was like, oh wow. Like I mean, it was really funny to walk down a street and see a building and go, oh crap, I've been on that building like many times. I killed a guy in there.
yeah,
Like, it was like literally that exact. I mean, the layout wasn't necessarily correct or exact because for gameplay reasons, but like a lot of the individual buildings were like really recognizable, and that was also true for me of 3, which was set in colonial times in America.
yeah.
And it's like running around in colonial Boston. I grew up in New England, so it's like, oh wow, I know exactly where we are, or Philadelphia or whatever.
Hmm.
Does it go down to Philadelphia? I can't remember if it goes that far, but it goes down into New York. I can't remember if it goes all the way to Philadelphia. But I mean, it's definitely like, like very recognizable places for me. And that was actually always pretty enticing. There's also this whole weird science fiction story with that I've grown to really find really fun and appreciate. But anyway, that's a whole separate thing.
Well, with both, to your
That was their
point,
big secret that they kept.
right,
Yeah.
right, yeah. That's their like X factor, if you will, or something. But yeah, to your point, there is a sort of
Right.
there is a
Yeah.
sort of video game tourism kind of thing going on of like, yeah, not necessarily be a tourist
Yeah.
and go and take people out, but just like the sense of relatability to, oh, I'm on Earth, and this is a place I've read about or even
Yeah.
been to, like
Yeah.
you said. So yeah, that's fair. And I think though we're not talking about Assassin's Creed here, I think it's hard not to talk about Assassin's Creed and Far Cry in the same breath, to be honest, because there's just not only do they sort of start merging in a lot of different ways over the years, but and they still have their differences, of course, especially the perspective, but there is a formula there that to some degree they struggle with still today of like how and when do they change that formula. So but Far Cry 2,
Right.
to bring it back to what we're talking about, in this introduction is sort of already starting to present you with some of the variables that you will be dealing with in the game that in Far Cry 6 it came out in 2021 or whatever it was. It's like you're still doing some of those same things is my impression. So
Yeah. In fact, I think it becomes even less. I've played, like I said, 4 and Primal, and I think the big thing that changes for me, I don't remember the map in particular being a thing that you equip and you hold in your hands
mm-hmm.
in quite that way. I remember it as like a pause screen deal. Like I think they lean more and more into the gaminess and less and get away from the simulation as time goes on, in the sense of like, no, time's still going. There's no pause. I mean, you can pause, right? You can go to get your objective or whatever and change your options and all of those sorts of things. But like, if you use the map, the game's not pausing.
Yeah, you're still
you're
vulnerable.
there. Like you can see the map in your hand. You've got the little, other thing there with the gems, the diamond blip, which yeah, I guess it's a GPS, right? But the world's behind that, right? That's just part of your hand, model now, and it's got some UI on top of the map to just for technical reasons, like they can't. They're not going to have a different texture every time you have a different objective. So they have a map texture and then they draw some vector art on top of it. But it's meant, you can sort of squint and see like, okay, in the perfect version of this game, I've like marked up the map every time I got to do something. You can sort of see that being the direction they go. But for readability, that also makes sense to do it the way they do. but the game's still there behind you, and if somebody sees you, they're not going to wait for you to put the map away, right? I mean, if you're in the brush and somebody, happens to walk out to your position and you don't notice them, they're going to start shooting, right? So there is this kind of like implicit simulated world that they're trying to present to you, which is something I do think that they definitely get away from, and lean more into, this game is sort of the least arcadey in a way. Right?
There's survival.
You know what I mean?
There's survival elements into it, which I don't. Do they continue doing that stuff in the future where there's like maintaining
in a more and more kind of campy way, in my opinion? Like I think 3 has a ton of like crafting, which is like, like they try different sort of systems to lay on top of that to systematize it, and here it's all just kind of stuff that's in the world, and then there are upgrade paths and things like that for all kinds of weapons and things like that. If you do particular mission types, if you do stuff for the gun merchant, I guess, as a character I don't specifically remember, but I'm sure we'll see soon, and that sort of thing. So it definitely goes that direction eventually. So yeah. But basically we spent most of our time talking about politics again.
Oh boy, we're the worst. Welcome
after SimCity, and we'll talk a little bit about the opening sequence, because I feel like with less than 20 minutes to go before we need to be at something else, we should maybe turn to get some email in and stuff like that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, we can hit that up, and then next time I guess we'll talk about the tutorial, basically, right?
Being physically embodied and the UI,
and I think the onboarding, right? The onboarding, I think, is for an open world game where they're trying to trailblaze a structure, is, I thought, quite good for the time,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And so we should talk about that. And
it's definitely what hooked me back in the day, of just like, oh man, like it was at exactly the right pace for me to incorporate all that stuff into my into my tool.
Yeah, exactly. This is
I think that's
this was the game that hooked you, that Thanksgiving so long ago.
Yes.
In 2009 is what ruined you when it comes to checkbox games that you still do today. To some degree,
yeah, that I still do today. Yeah. It's funny because I don't play the Far Cry ones very much because they are gun games, and I don't play as many gun games, like I said.
Yeah, right.
But I have played 4, and I have, like I said, I have 3, and I don't think I played 3. I do remember that bad guy, but I don't think I played it. I think I just remember the advertising. Anyway, so let's go to email.
Yep.
This was, of course, sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. You, sir, of course, as always, have the first one.
Mega Man Proto Man sound. Is that right?
Yep. Okay. Yeah, we're still getting some Mega Man stuff.
I thought I must have read that from last time. This was one we didn't get to that I had skimmed.
Correct. Yeah, okay. We only read one apiece last
time. Got it. Okay, so Mega Man Proto Man sound from Oliver UV. Hi, Mystery Dip mentioned that in Mega Man X they managed to listen to more of the Proto Man track by switching weapons at the right time. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, right. I remember that, Mel.
This was Mystery Dip.
Yep. In Mega Man 3, the first game with Proto Man, you can kill yourself from the spikes while dropping down after meeting Proto Man on Shadow Man's stage to make the game's music stop entirely for the whole stage. I think this trick is probably frame perfect, though I'm not a speedrunner. This helps a lot in the speedruns as it reduces lag considerably. It's interesting how they balance lag versus level complexity back in those days. Not sure any modern game designer would go, heck, 10 frames per second is enough in this area as long as there are enough enemies on screen to make this challenge really hard. Have a good day, everyone. Oliver UV. That's bananas.
Yeah, it's amazing that there's a speedrunning trick to turn off the music because it slows the game down.
Yeah. Though that's some memory constraints, folks. It's like, yep, can
Well,
we
I mean, it's pure processing
I
power. It's
guess
not
yeah.
even memory. I
Right,
mean, it's
right. Well,
memory. Memory is part of that constraint because memory access times are what they are. But yeah, that is definitely that is a very funny thing to me of just like, oh yeah, we're just gonna, yep, we're just gonna. I mean, I felt that way about, I guess it was Castlevania 4 with some of the
yeah.
what mode
Mode
7 stuff.
yeah, that stuff
It was
slowed
mode
way
7, right?
down.
Oh my god! And I just was like, oh, like whose idea was that this was okay?
Yeah.
When they do that stuff in Final Fantasy 6, it tends to be cinematic, and it kind of doesn't matter what the frame rate is. They're using it in, like, it's also a JRPG, and like it doesn't really matter most of the time how it's performing, because everything's so sort of turn based.
Yeah.
But yeah, in an action game, to drop down to 10 frames a second because you're playing music is it's a choice.
Hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just, you also run out, you have to ship the game, so you ship the game. All right, here's one from Ashton Herman. The subject is SimCity and the reason these things are games. And actually, without even reading the email, I want to say, we were reporting on what, I don't know what Will Wright says about these things being toys, not games. I'm like a person who's way more inclusive in terms of what's a game. Like if the person who made it wants to call it a game, I'm totally fine with that. If they want to call it a toy, I'm also fine with that. I just wanted to say that, just reading
Sure.
the subject
Yeah.
line, because I know like the game, it's not a game thing has been a real gatekeeping thing in the last 15 years. Particularly as indie games came up and sort of individual voices did. But okay, so hey, Tim and Brett. Hey, I've really enjoyed your discussion about SimCity, and I particularly enjoyed the personal and ethical questions that it forced Brett to consider, as well as the underlying political subtext that Tim always aptly pointed out. Your discussion reminded me of an unlikely game, The Red Strings Club by Deconstruct Team. This game looks and feels like a classic LucasArts adventure point and click, but it plays out more like a visual novel than anything else. Ostensibly, it has nothing in common with a city builder, but as SimCity did for Brett, it forced me to consider and reconcile with some of my own moral beliefs. I'd once wrote on Medium about the reason the Red Strings Club had to be a game, but to quickly summarize, I decided that even though it was light on interactivity, the medium naturally forced me to consider the ethical questions it posed to me on a more personal level than a book or film ever could. I was the one who had to decide if people should be allowed free will to commit heinous crimes. I was the one who had to decide if bigotry should be allowed to persist in the name of independent thought. It's an incredible and I think often unsung strength of video games as a format for storytelling, and I love that it was able to shine through even in a 30-year-old city builder. Do either of you have any other experiences or memories where this has maybe proven true? Thanks as always, Ashton. So, that's a big matzo ball, as they say. I don't know. Do you have any other game experience or memories where that has proven true? I mean, I think it comes up with me a lot. But
well, it is. I mean, generally, it is a reason why I love the medium as well as a player for sure. And the fact that it can do that. I don't have like, I feel like it might be more that the kinds of games that I play and look for in my free time are maybe not as intentional, in that goal as they could be. Like I don't, I know there's a lot of indie games out there, especially that do push the envelope on this stuff, and I know I would enjoy because of the decision making you have to make. But like for me, it's like Witcher 3. It's like I love that. The whole or even Fallout 3, right? It's like the big decisions you make have repercussions to the world and those sorts of things. But Witcher 3 being very gray in a lot of the quests, and you never really feel good about your decisions. But on the political level, like to the depth that he's talking about, or like the gravity rather that he's talking about with bigotry and things like that, I can't think of anything I've played like that in a while, but I should. I definitely should.
I can, now that you've sort of been talking, give me a little room to think. I although I worked on the follow up, at the time I didn't have any connection with this game. I think I felt that in Gone Home, um,
Oh yeah.
because of the way they sort of spread out sort of clues about what's going on in relationships inside this family, basically. You're a member of this family coming home after a year abroad, and you're kind of walking around the house discovering things about your sister and your parents, and all of these people, both as in relationships between them, but also as individuals, in their histories. There's some pretty dark stuff there if you sort of put it together. And read out in a book form, it would play out differently. I don't think it would. I think there's just as much potential for impact there. And I am a person who generally prefers reading, honestly, to games. It's like, for me, it's like reading, then movies, then games. So, I mean, and I don't have a podcast about books or movies. But in terms of like, what I would give up, is like the last one to go would probably be books. Because I do think that those more mature mediums speak to me a little bit more clearly. But I do think there are flashes of that in other games. And Firewatch has a section at the beginning, which I find really impactful, which is basically just a very simple narrative with a few binary choices that don't appear to have an immediate impact. They just sort of like personalize. They have a few choices like that even in the game, where you get to name a turtle, and I mean there's stuff like that that's in that game. Has that. I had another one in mind, but it has slipped away.
Well, I thought of
and The Walking Dead.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Yeah, Walking Dead is something that I did play. That though they have generally that diamond formula by the beginning to the end, for certain things, there definitely were along the way. There were definitely, I felt, impact, and I like that series. I read the comic from the beginning, and so I had a personal connection. But Clementine and everything that's going on there in that first game, I thought was quite good. I only played the first.
Yeah, time. and it accretes, right? I mean, it's part of it is the repetition of certain mechanical things, like especially the so and so will remember that.
Yeah,
By the time that lands. Like, I don't think they knew where that was going. I know they didn't know. I've spoken to Sean and Jake about it. They didn't know where that was going in the final episode when they started. They were just trying to add a little depth. And there isn't actually a mechanical thing that happens there. It's not like a checkbox goes somewhere. I mean, one does more for like, what decisions did you make with the what did you do versus other people who played this game thing that was part of their episodic model. But it didn't really change. There weren't like additional branching paths or anything like that based on choices that you made. So when somebody said so-and-so will remember that, it was more of an underline of like, you just did something, and it was kind of put that in your face. And that happens like again and again for whatever, the first 4 or 5 or whatever episodes it is. I don't remember if it's a 5 or 6 episode thing. And then in the last one, in like the last scene, you're talking to Clementine for the last time. And as you're telling her things, it's saying Clementine will remember that. And like the impact of that, like I was in tears. Like I was just like a wreck, from just the accretion of that like drip. And I played them all at once. Like I didn't play them one a month or anything like that. I played them later after they were all out. And that just hit, that just hit so hard, in a way unique to video games. And I, we're both struggling to come up with long lists of things where like, oh yeah, this one and that one and the other thing. But I do think that it's there. We're just still finding it, and we're still finding our way to have both an economic model that makes sense to pay for the expense of building these things, as well as the tools to do those sorts of emotional impacts. Actually, you know what? Here's one that's big budget. Uncharted 2 has a section when you're in this Himalayan village where you have just been recovering. It's after basically I think it's after the train section. I can't remember exactly. I think so. But you're recovering, and there's a section where you just kind of walk around and just interact with the village. And that actually works pretty well for me as well. It's like a lull. You know, and it's because of like the way that, you know, it works the same way something similar works in a cliffhanger movie like Raiders of the Lost Ark or something like that. It's like, oh yeah, but now you're just going to hang out with Sully for a little while, you know, and, you know, more stuff will, you know, it'll ramp up again, but there's like this moment of calm, you know, where you can have this sort of moment of peace to sort of recuperate and think about what's happened so far and just kind of just be in a new place. That's another game I think that has that. So yeah, we have it, you know, and we have our own unique thing of it. And I you know, we'll do more and more of that. So anyway, yeah, so that's, yeah, I think some of the things that Ashton was talking about, you know, forcing you to consider things and make a decision.
Well, I think there is a lot of stuff in the indie space that I haven't played that I know pushes this, you know, because they can. You mentioned Gone Home as, you know, sort of like indie plus, if you maybe want to call it that or something, but it was indie. And so, yeah, I think I just don't seek them out, I think, enough in my own free time, you know, unless it's for the podcast or something. So,
yeah.
So, but I know there's more out there. And an anecdote about Walking Dead for me, once I finished that season 1, because I also just played it straight through and waited for them all to come out. The reason I think back, and the reason I actually didn't play season 2 is because there was this save game import feature where you were able to take your decisions forward into the next season, and it broke for me.
Oh yeah.
And I couldn't, you know, I would have had to have replayed season 1 and done all the same decisions or something, you know, which I wasn't willing to do. And I didn't want to start season 2 from scratch because I had made those decisions in season 1. And so it's just such a sort of a weird technical bug example of torpedoing sort of like the whole concept.
I had a similar glitch happen between the next to last and last episode of the first season, which I think I played on iPad, which was probably the worst possible decision. But at the time I was traveling a lot and it was the thing that made sense for me. And, you know, I had chosen like to build up so that he had people around him. And then I started the final thing. It was like, oh no, you have nobody around you. Like, it was like I'd made all the opposite decisions.
Yeah.
And I was like, ugh, like, it's like, this was maybe their golden path.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But,
you know, and so you were stuck with the sort of their decisions, you know, in a way.
It's crazy to have a bug undermine the whole point of something, though, so much.
Did you have any of that with the Mass Effect series? How'd you feel about that?
I only played 1. I haven't played 2.
Okay.
Yeah, or 3.
Okay. Yeah, because that I think is another case where, and that's one that
I have a whole
every now and again I'm like,
oh,
do I have to? Maybe I have to go back and.
I have a whole soapbox about Mass Effect, but we'll probably never get there. But
okay, well, you know, we got time. Anyway, thanks for the emails to devgameclub@gmail.com. We, of course, also love your reviews. You can shoot us those on the Apple Podcast infrastructure or, you know, whatever platform you like. It's just that those are the ones we see. So if you post it somewhere else, just let us know. We'll go look it up, or better yet, you can just send it in or send us a link, or I don't know, something like that. We'll read those on the air as well. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at @devgameclub. We can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
You are still twitching, hey June, at twitch.tv/Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end. You are going to be returning to Dark Souls next Monday.
Yes, yeah. Not this week, which you will already know as you're listening to this. But yeah, I'll return next week. I'm not sure where I'm going to go. I was heading toward some of the gold doors, but I think I'm going to rethink that and do something else that I want to do first. So
okay.
Yeah, I need to get the next ember, if you know what I'm saying.
I see. Yeah. Well, you've got those burning embers out there. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo and our merch store are by Mark Garcia. Have fun taking over a war-torn African nation safe house by safe house this week, and good night.
Good night.